why do we pay so much attention? Is it just because they're white? No, it is not because Ukrainians are white or European.
CNN's Fareed Zakaria pushed back on the idea that the media is hyper-focused on Russia's invasion of Ukraine simply because Ukrainians are white. Now, before I get to the CNN clip, I want to show you several examples that form the basis for the reaction that he is referring to.
This is not a developing third world nation. This is Europe.
These are prosperous middle-class people. These are not people trying to get away from areas in North Africa. They look like any European family that you would live next door to.
What could be a difference here from other conflicts, that could seem very far away, in Africa or Middle East or whatever. I mean, these are Europeans that we're seeing being killed.
This isn't a place, with all due respect, like Iraq or Afghanistan. This is a relatively civilized, relatively European, I have to choose those words carefully too, city where you wouldn't expect that or hope that it's going to happen.
So, examples like this are why a lot of people feel that the hyper-focus on this conflict in Ukraine is simply because Ukrainians are white, and a lot of the media being white, they feel a little more attached to the Ukrainians being impacted by this. Now, before I get to Fareed Zakaria's clip, and I will say, he does make a point that I agree with, but it's sort of a different point than what we're seeing here. But I want to share this because in case these clips weren't clear enough for you, you have this. This is from Spain. This is a lawmaker in Spain that said this. This is a quote. "These are real refugees. Women, children, and elderly should be welcomed in Europe. Now, everyone should understand the difference between these refugees and the invasion of Muslim youth of military age who have crossed our borders trying to destabilize and colonize Europe." You can't get any more clear than this in their racism, in their bigotry, in how they are approaching this issue. So all of this is absolutely disgusting, but it's important to note here that a lot of these conversations are around refugees. Not all of them. As you saw, I think one of the clips from the media there, he was just, the person commenting there was just generally talking about how this is more of an issue because, they're more relatable because he himself is white. But a lot of the conversations here are around refugees. And in that sense, there's absolutely a double standard. I mean, think about Yemen, think about Palestinians, think about the total lack of sanctions on Saudi Arabia and Israel when it comes to those conflicts. So clearly there's a real double standard there when it comes to the actual people being impacted by these various conflicts. But the reason why there is a hyper focus on Russia's invasion of Ukraine right now, I think it's important to note here, there is a reason for that. So Fareed Zakaria lays this out, and I think he's largely right to say this.
A skirmish that takes place between two small countries in Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America, they don't threaten to upend the international system. When you have a nuclear power, the largest nuclear power in the world, Russia has more nuclear weapons than the United States, a great power with a veto in the Security Council. When it threatens its neighbor, what you are reverting to is a pattern of great power politics that is more reminiscent of the age of Hitler and Mussolini, more reminiscent of 19th century Europe, where the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must. That is a very different world than we've lived in for the last 70 years, and certainly ever since the end of the Cold War. So it's not, to put it directly to people who think about this and they say, why are Ukrainians being why do we pay so much attention? Is it just because they're white? No, it is not because Ukrainians are white or European. It's because their aggressor, their invader, is a nuclear-armed superpower. That's the danger, that if Russia can get away with this, it can get away with invading Poland. It can get away with invading the Baltic states. China can get away with invading Taiwan.
So I think Zakaria here is largely correct. There really is sort of two different discussions going on here. On one hand, you absolutely have a double standard when it comes to how refugees are viewed, depending on how they look, on how Ukrainians generally are being viewed and discussed compared to refugees and, civilians in other war-torn countries. You're seeing a double standard when it comes to how sanctions are being applied or called for when it comes to Russia versus looking at Israel and their treatment of Palestinians, or Saudi Arabia and what's happening in Yemen. So there absolutely is a double standard there for sure. But the reason why this Russia invasion of Ukraine is different is because Russia has nuclear weapons, and this conflict could potentially escalate to a world war were the US and NATO to get directly involved. So I think it's important to be able to, hold those two thoughts in your head at the same time. Recognize the double standards in how the world has reacted to this conflict, how the media has reacted to this when it comes to calling for sanctions and other various responses, and comparing that to other conflicts where that anger, that fervor simply isn't there.